In the 15th century, there were no PlayStations, mobiles, social media, internet, and at that point of time, it were only the books which became the medium for the dissemination of knowledge. That is to say, to learn about any new thing, to get any new information, people had to rely upon books. Now, during this time, following the introduction of the mechanical printing press that happened with the Gutenberg printing press, more and more books were now flooding the markets. And these books were very readily available because the production of these books now became quite easy. And at the same time, these books were also quite cheap, which is why it was possible for even the common people to procure these books. Now, all these things eventually led to the print revolution that occurred in the 15th century in Europe. Now, what do we understand by the print revolution in Europe? By this, we mean that during this time there happened a boost in the production of books, and at the same time this now facilitated the widespread of ideas, because earlier on it was not possible for people to read books. Books were something that were restricted only to the nobles and the aristocrats, simply because those books were so expensive. But now cheap books which were readily available flooded the markets, and people now got access to new ideas and information from these books. And the print revolution of Europe was a major breakthrough moment, not just in the history of printing but in the history of humankind as well. Because with access to knowledge, with access to newer ways of thinking, people were now able to question their position in the society. People were now able to understand their subordinate and oppressive status in the society. So needless to mention, this was a period of transition in the socio-political and cultural landscapes of Europe, and thanks to the Gutenberg printing press which made all this possible. Now, the point that we mentioned a while ago was that earlier on the practice of reading was restricted to the elites solely. Firstly, these books were very costly. These were expensive because these were handwritten manuscripts. We learned that the production of handwritten manuscripts was quite laborious and expensive, which is why it was not possible for the common people to get hold of these books. So from this we can also understand that information and knowledge was restricted to only these people. The common people did not get to read books. But do you think that the common people never got to know anything? That was not the case, because the common people had to rely upon a world of oral tradition. Now, what do we understand by oral tradition? During this time, when the common people did not have access to these very expensive books, they now gathered in meetings. And in these gatherings of common people, sacred texts were read out, ballads were recited, and even folk tales were narrated. So from this, what we can understand is that the dissemination of knowledge happened as a collective experience. Now, this experience of reading alone and silently was not something that these common people knew. Instead, in order to get knowledge, they had to rely upon performances. All these kinds of performances were the ways through which common people got to know about different kinds of things, be that the religious texts or even the ballads, folk tales, and other narrative pieces. Now, the print revolution facilitated the birth of a new reading culture, because more and more books were now available to people. Common people who were earlier on not able to buy new books were now able to do so, simply because many cheap books were now available in the markets. Now, from this we are also to understand how new ways of thinking, new ways of questioning were birthed in the minds of these people. Earlier on, they were not aware of their position in the society. All they knew was what they were meant to know. But now it were them who could decide what they wanted to know, what they wanted to learn. So this new reading culture was a direct offspring of the print revolution, so to speak. Now this transition from watching performances to reading books was not very simple in nature. It was a very complex transition, and the major reason behind this was the low literacy rate in most European countries till the 20th century. So even though a whole lot of books now flooded the markets, many people were not able to read them, simply because access to institutionalized education was not possible at this point of time. The elites and the aristocrats used to get education, but the common people who earlier on used to bask in a world of oral tradition were the ones who did not have access to proper education. And without education, will you ever be able to read a book? If you do not know your letters properly, if you do not know your grammar properly, will you be able to make sense of any book, any lesson? You'll not be able to do so. And this was exactly what was happening till the 20th century in many European countries, when the literacy rates were very low. But the publishers and the booksellers realized that people would now love to hear the texts if they cannot read the same. But can a book be heard if not read? For this reason, the publishers now came up with a new idea. They were now trying to infuse the two reading cultures of hearing and reading. So how was this done? Publishers now began to publish popular ballads and other folk tales, and these books were filled with pictures, as you can see here. Why was this done? This was done in order to arouse the curiosity and interest of the listening population. But how did people listen to these books? For this reason now came into being many public gatherings. There were people who used to read out these books in village gatherings as well as taverns in towns. This illustration shows you how a person is reading out a book to a mass of people who probably cannot read this book. Now in this way, the former divide that used to exist between the reading culture and the hearing culture was also dissolved. This was also a revolutionary moment in the history of printing in Europe, because the reading public now intermingled with the hearing public. And the publishers did this by taking into account the demographics of the population, because they wanted to reach out to more and more masses, and they did not want this low literacy rate to hinder this process, which is why these new kinds of books which were filled with pictures were now published around this time. So the print revolution was a boon to humankind in every possible way. People were now able to read, to know about the society, to know about their religion. But at the same time, it caused fear in the minds of many people. But why do you think did some sections of the population hold this new printing technology with suspicion and fear? To understand this, we will have to go back to the medieval times and take into account how knowledge was disseminated around that time and who was in power at that point of time. Now in medieval European kingdoms and empires, it were the emperors and the monarchs who used to be at the helm of power. So ultimate authority rested at the disposal of the monarch or the emperor. And at the same time, the clergy also assumed utmost importance in the society, because the clergy or the church was the site from which knowledge was spread among the masses, from which knowledge was disseminated among the masses. And this church or the clergy wanted masses to know only what they sanctioned. They did not want the masses to think along new lines. So from this we can understand that knowledge was quite restricted in the hands of the clergy as well as the monarchy. Because the clergy feared that if the masses get to know about new things, they would now try to overturn the tables. They would overthrow their authority. The clergy used to oppress the masses by restricting their access to knowledge. And it is for this reason that the clergy as well as the aristocratic sections now held the print technology with suspicion. Let us find out about this in greater detail. But before proceeding with this lesson, let me ask you a question. In medieval times, people of Europe had access to books to read about the society and politics. Do you think this statement is true or false? Well, the correct answer is that this statement is false. In medieval times, it were the clergy and the church who spread knowledge among the masses, because the masses did not have access to books to read about the society and various other things. Now these monarchs, religious authorities and some writers and artists were suspicious of the new print technology, as we just mentioned. Because at this point of time, they were now fearing that wide circulation of ideas were almost about to supplant and overthrow their authority. They would no longer be in power if the masses questioned their authority. Now the members of the clergy believed that they were ordained by God to rule people, and at the same time the monarchs also believed that they were divinely ordained. And all these ideas were spread among the masses by the clergy. And if the masses now started learning new things, they would invariably question that the monarchs are most definitely not divinely ordained beings. They would now question that the religious authorities are quite oppressive, which in turn would mean a lessening of their hold and authority on people. Which is why the print technology did not seem as a boon to these sections of the society. They were the ones who wanted to stop the spread of print technology so that new books did not reach the masses and so that people were not tempted to think along new lines. So this brings us to an end of our discussion on the impact of print revolution in Europe. We focused on its impact on the religious sphere. In a subsequent lesson, we will be taking this discussion ahead, where we will learn how the print revolution actually caused a challenge to religious authority in Europe and how this print revolution created great changes in the socio-political and cultural landscapes throughout the continent. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it's rewarding too. So register for free now.